Unveiling the Darkness, a look at Emil Cioran's philosophy. Welcome back to Cosmic Serenity, your gateway to the profound realms of philosophy, existence, and the cosmos. I'm your host, and today we're embarking on a journey into the depths of one of the most provocative and controversial philosophers of the 20th century, Emil Cioran. As we settle into this exploration, I invite you to make yourself comfortable. Perhaps find a quiet corner, dim the lights, and allow yourself to be fully present. For the next hour or so, we'll be delving into a world of thought that is as challenging as it is illuminating. Cioran's philosophy isn't for the faint of heart, but it offers a unique perspective on the human condition that can be both unsettling and oddly comforting. Emil Cioran, born in 1911 in Romania and later adopting French as his primary language of expression, stands as a towering figure in the landscape of existential philosophy. His work is characterized by a profound pessimism, a razor-sharp wit, and an unflinching examination of life's darkest aspects. Yet, despite the bleakness of his outlook, there's a strange beauty in his writing, a poetic quality that elevates his thoughts beyond mere despair into the realm of art. As we begin our journey through Cioran's philosophical landscape, it's important to note that his ideas aren't meant to be taken as absolute truths. Rather, they serve as provocations, challenges to our conventional ways of thinking about life, death, meaning, and existence itself. Whether you find yourself nodding in agreement or recoiling in disagreement, the goal is to engage with these ideas, to let them stir something within you, and perhaps to gain a new perspective on your own existence. So, let's start at the beginning with one of the core tenets of Cioran's philosophy, the absurdity of existence. The absurdity of existence. Imagine, if you will, being suddenly thrust into existence without any prior consent or preparation. You find yourself on a spinning globe, hurtling through an infinite void, surrounded by billions of other beings, all seemingly engaged in a frantic dance of survival and meaning-making. This, in essence, is how Cioran viewed the human condition. For Cioran, the very fact of our existence is absurd. We didn't ask to be born, yet here we are, forced to grapple with consciousness, mortality, and the relentless march of time. In his book, The Trouble with Being Born, Cioran writes, "It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late." This statement, shocking as it may seem, encapsulates his view on the absurdity of life. But what does Cioran mean by absurdity? It's not merely that life is strange or nonsensical. Rather, it's the fundamental mismatch between our desire for meaning, order, and purpose, and the universe's apparent indifference to these desires. We yearn for significance in a cosmos that seems utterly unconcerned with our existence. Think about it. We spend our lives striving, achieving, loving, losing, all within the span of a few decades. And then, in the blink of an eye on the cosmic scale, we're gone. Our greatest triumphs, our deepest sorrows, all fade into the vast ocean of time. From this perspective, doesn't the intensity with which we approach life seem a bit absurd? Cioran was heavily influenced by existentialist thinkers like Albert Camus, who famously used the myth of Sisyphus to illustrate the absurdity of human existence. Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time, becomes a metaphor for the human condition. We engage in our daily routines, our long-term projects, our grand ambitions, all the while knowing that death awaits us, that entropy will eventually undo all our efforts. But Cioran takes this absurdity a step further. For him, it's not just that our actions are ultimately futile, it's that our very being is a kind of cosmic joke. In A Short History of Decay, he writes, "We are born to exist, not to know, to be, not to assert ourselves." This statement challenges our deeply held belief that human existence has some inherent purpose or meaning. Consider for a moment the vastness of the universe. Our planet, a tiny speck in an inconceivably large cosmos, has existed for billions of years before us and will likely continue long after we're gone. In this context, the idea that human life has some special significance starts to seem, well, absurd. But Cioran doesn't stop at pointing out the absurdity of our existence. He goes further, suggesting that this absurdity is a source of both despair and liberation. On one hand, realizing the ultimate meaninglessness of our strivings can be deeply depressing. On the other hand, it can be freeing. If nothing ultimately matters, then we're free to create our own meaning, to live authentically without the burden of cosmic significance. This is where Cioran's philosophy diverges from pure nihilism. While he acknowledges the absence of inherent meaning, he doesn't advocate for complete despair or inaction. Instead, he suggests a kind of defiant existence in the face of absurdity. We continue to live, to think, to create, not because it serves some greater purpose, but simply because we are here, now, existing. In On the Heights of Despair, Cioran writes, "I've invented nothing. I've simply been the secretary of my sensations." This humble yet profound statement encapsulates his approach to philosophy. He's not trying to construct grand systems or universal truths. Instead, he's bearing witness to the experience of being human, with all its contradictions and absurdities. As we sit with this idea of existential absurdity, it's natural to feel a mix of emotions. There might be a sense of despair at the apparent meaninglessness of it all, but there might also be a strange sort of comfort. After all, if existence is absurd, then perhaps we don't need to take ourselves quite so seriously. Perhaps we can find a kind of freedom in acknowledging the cosmic insignificance of our day-to-day concerns. But this absurdity is just the beginning of Cioran's philosophical journey. For him, the recognition of life's absurdity leads naturally to another key aspect of his thought: the inevitability of suffering. The inevitability of suffering. As we delve deeper into Cioran's philosophy, we come face to face with one of his most challenging ideas: the inevitability of suffering. For Cioran, suffering isn't just an unfortunate aspect of life that we occasionally encounter. It's not something that happens to us because of bad luck or poor choices. Instead, suffering is woven into the very fabric of existence itself. In The Trouble with Being Born, Cioran writes, "It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late." This provocative statement encapsulates his view on suffering. From the moment we're born, we're on a trajectory towards decay and death. Every experience, every relationship, every achievement is ultimately tinged with the knowledge of its impermanence. But let's break this down further. What exactly does Cioran mean when he talks about the inevitability of suffering? First and foremost, there's the physical suffering inherent in being a biological organism. Our bodies are fragile, susceptible to illness, injury, and the relentless march of aging. From the moment we're born, our cells begin to deteriorate. We experience hunger, thirst, fatigue, pain. Even in the best of circumstances, our physical existence is a constant negotiation with discomfort and limitation. Then there's emotional suffering. We form attachments to people, places, and things, knowing full well that we will inevitably lose them. We experience disappointment, heartbreak, grief. We struggle with anxiety about the future and regret about the past. Even our happiest moments are shadowed by the knowledge that they will end. But Cioran goes even further. He suggests that consciousness itself is a form of suffering. Our ability to think, to be aware of our own existence, is what sets us apart from other animals. But this gift of consciousness comes with a heavy price. We're aware of our own mortality, of the vastness of time and space, of our own insignificance in the grand scheme of things. This awareness, according to Cioran, is a constant source of anguish. In On the Heights of Despair, he writes, "I feel completely detached from everything, unable to desire anything. My only emotions are negative ones. All my days are marked by a horrible nothingness." This quote gives us a glimpse into the depths of Cioran's pessimism. For him, even the absence of suffering, a state of neutrality or detachment, becomes its own form of suffering. But here's where Cioran's philosophy gets really interesting. He doesn't just point out the ubiquity of suffering and leave it at that. Instead, he suggests that our attempts to avoid or alleviate suffering often make it worse. Think about it. How much of our lives do we spend trying to avoid pain, to secure comfort, to ensure our future happiness? We work hard to accumulate wealth and status, thinking it will protect us from suffering. We seek out relationships, hoping they will fill the void within us. We distract ourselves with entertainment, consumption, and endless activity. But for Cioran, all of these efforts are futile. In fact, they often increase our suffering by creating attachments and expectations that inevitably lead to disappointment. The more we try to escape suffering, the more entangled we become in it. So what's the alternative? Cioran doesn't offer easy solutions or comforting platitudes. Instead, he suggests a radical acceptance of suffering as an integral part of existence. In The Trouble with Being Born, he writes, "It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late. This isn't a call to suicide, but rather a provocative way of pointing out that we can't escape suffering, even through death. Instead of trying to avoid suffering, Cioran suggests that we face it head-on. We acknowledge its presence in our lives, not as an unwelcome intruder, but as an inherent part of being alive. This doesn't mean we seek out suffering or glorify it. Rather, we stop expending so much energy trying to escape it. There's a certain freedom in this perspective. If suffering is inevitable, then we can stop blaming ourselves when we experience it. We can let go of the illusion that if we just do everything right, we'll be able to avoid pain. We can even find a kind of camaraderie with our fellow humans, all of us united in our shared experience of suffering. But make no mistake, Cioran's philosophy is not about finding silver linings or turning lemons into lemonade. He's not suggesting that suffering makes us stronger or that it's all part of some grand plan. For Cioran, suffering simply is. It's a fundamental condition of existence, as inescapable as gravity. This might seem like an unbearably bleak perspective, and indeed, Cioran's writing can be challenging to engage with. But there's also a strange kind of comfort in his unflinching honesty. In a world that often tries to sell us on easy solutions and quick fixes, Cioran's acknowledgement of the depth and persistence of suffering can feel like a breath of fresh air. Moreover, Cioran's perspective on suffering can actually be quite liberating. If we accept that suffering is an inevitable part of life, we can stop expending so much energy trying to avoid it. We can live more authentically, without the constant anxiety of trying to secure a suffering-free future, which, according to Cioran, doesn't exist anyway. As we sit with this idea of the inevitability of suffering, it's natural to feel a range of emotions. There might be resistance. After all, who wants to accept that suffering is unavoidable? There might be a sense of despair or hopelessness, but there might also be a strange sort of peace. After all, if suffering is truly inevitable, then perhaps we can stop fighting so hard against it and start living more fully in the present moment. But this acceptance of suffering leads us to another key aspect of Cioran's philosophy: his views on hope. Because if suffering is inevitable, what role does hope play in our lives? Let's explore this next: the futility of hope. As we continue our journey through Emil Cioran's philosophical landscape, we come to one of his most provocative ideas: the futility of hope. In a world where positive thinking and optimism are often touted as virtues, Cioran's stance on hope might seem shocking, even offensive. But as with all of Cioran's ideas, it's worth examining closely, even if we ultimately disagree. In A Short History of Decay, Cioran writes, "Hope is the normal form of delirium." This statement encapsulates his view on hope not as a positive force that helps us persevere through difficult times, but as a kind of madness that blinds us to the reality of our condition. But what exactly does Cioran mean when he talks about the futility of hope? And why does he take such a strong stance against something that many people see as essential to human happiness and resilience? To understand Cioran's perspective on hope, we need to consider it in the context of his broader philosophy. As we've discussed, Cioran sees existence as fundamentally absurd and suffering as inevitable. In this context, hope becomes a kind of willful delusion, a way of denying the harsh realities of life. Think about it. When we hope, we're essentially projecting our desires onto an uncertain future. We hope for success, for love, for happiness, for a better world. But in doing so, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment. Because no matter how much we achieve, no matter how much our circumstances improve, we can never escape the fundamental conditions of existence: our mortality, our vulnerability to suffering, the ultimate meaninglessness of our strivings. In The Trouble with Being Born, Cioran writes, "It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late." This statement, while shocking, illustrates Cioran's view on the futility of hope. Even if we achieve everything we hope for, we can never escape the fact of our own mortality. All of our hopes and dreams are ultimately rendered meaningless by the fact of our inevitable death. But Cioran goes even further. He suggests that hope is not just futile, but actively harmful. How so? Because hope keeps us tethered to illusions, preventing us from facing reality as it is. When we hope, we're essentially saying that the present moment is not enough, that we need something more, something different, something better. This constant reaching for a better future prevents us from fully engaging with the here and now. Moreover, Cioran argues that hope amplifies our suffering. When we hope, we create expectations. And when those expectations are inevitably disappointed, as they must be in a world of constant change and ultimate meaninglessness, we suffer. The higher our hopes, the more crushing our disappointment. In On the Heights of Despair, Cioran writes, "I've invented nothing. I've simply been the secretary of my sensations." This statement reflects his commitment to facing reality as it is, without the comforting illusions of hope. For Cioran, true wisdom comes not from hoping for a better future, but from fully acknowledging the harsh realities of existence. But let's be clear, Cioran's rejection of hope is not a call for despair or inaction. Rather, it's a call for a kind of clear-sighted engagement with reality. Instead of pinning our happiness on future outcomes, Cioran suggests we focus on the present moment. Instead of hoping for a better world, we accept the world as it is with all its absurdity and suffering. This might seem like a recipe for nihilism or passivity, but paradoxically, Cioran's rejection of hope can be quite liberating. If we let go of our hopes for the future, we're free to engage more fully with the present. If we stop expecting life to conform to our desires, we can appreciate it for what it is, rather than constantly measuring it against what we think it should be. Moreover, Cioran's perspective on hope can actually be a source of comfort in difficult times. If we accept that suffering is inevitable and that our hopes are ultimately futile, we can stop blaming ourselves when things don't go as planned. We can let go of the crushing weight of expectations and simply be with what is. Of course, living without hope is no easy task. Hope is deeply ingrained in the human psyche, and for good reason. It's been a powerful force for survival and progress throughout human history. Letting go of hope requires a radical shift in perspective, a willingness to face the void without flinching. But for Cioran, this willingness to face reality without the comfort of hope is the mark of true courage and authenticity. In The Trouble with Being Born, he writes, "We are afraid of the enormity of the possible." This statement reflects the idea that truly facing reality, without the cushion of hope, can be terrifying. But it's only by facing this enormity that we can live authentically. As we sit with Cioran's ideas about hope, it's natural to feel a mix of emotions. There might be resistance. After all, hope has long been seen as a virtue, a source of strength in difficult times. There might be fear. What would life be like without the comfort of hope? But there might also be a sense of liberation. Imagine living fully in the present, free from the anxiety of unfulfilled expectations, engaged with reality as it is rather than as we wish it to be. But Cioran's rejection of hope is just one aspect of his philosophy. It's intimately connected to another key theme in his work, his view of time. Let's explore this next. Time, a relentless oppressor. In Cioran's philosophical worldview, time plays a central and deeply troubling role. Far from being a neutral backdrop against which our lives unfold, time is seen as an active force, and not a benevolent one. For Cioran, time is a relentless oppressor, a constant reminder of our mortality and the transient nature of everything we hold dear. In The Trouble with Being Born, Cioran writes, "The fact that life has no meaning is a reason to live, moreover, the only one." This paradoxical statement encapsulates his view of time and existence. Our awareness of time, of our own finite nature in a seemingly infinite universe, is both our curse and our defining characteristic as conscious beings. But let's delve deeper into Cioran's conception of time. What exactly does he mean when he describes time as an oppressor? First and foremost, time is the medium through which we experience decay and death. From the moment we're born, we're on a one-way journey towards our own demise. Every tick of the clock brings us closer to our end. This awareness, Cioran argues, colors every aspect of our existence. Even in our happiest moments, there's always the underlying knowledge that this too shall pass. In A Short History of Decay, Cioran writes, "We are all deep in a hell, each moment of which is a miracle." This statement beautifully captures the dual nature of time in Cioran's philosophy. On one hand, time is hell, a constant march towards decay and oblivion. On the other hand, each moment is a miracle, a brief flicker of consciousness in the vast darkness of eternity. But time isn't just about our individual mortality. It's also about the impermanence of everything we create and value. Civilizations rise and fall. Great works of art crumble to dust. Even the stars themselves will eventually burn out. In the face of cosmic time, all of human history is but a blink of an eye. This awareness of the vastness of time and our own insignificance within it can be profoundly unsettling. It challenges our sense of importance and meaning. After all, if everything we do will ultimately be erased by the passage of time, what's the point of doing anything at all? But Cioran doesn't stop at pointing out the oppressive nature of time. He goes further, suggesting that our attempts to resist time, to create lasting legacies, to achieve immortality through our works, are not only futile but actually increase our suffering. Think about it. How much of our lives do we spend trying to make our mark on the world? We strive for success, for recognition, for some kind of lasting impact. But for Cioran, these efforts are doomed to failure. No matter what we achieve, time will eventually erase it all. Our desperate attempts to resist time only make us more acutely aware of its relentless march. In On the Heights of Despair, Cioran writes, "I've invented nothing. I've simply been the secretary of my sensations." This humble statement reflects his view that true wisdom comes not from trying to conquer time, but from fully acknowledging its power over us. Instead of futilely resisting time, Cioran suggests we face it head-on, accepting our temporal nature and the transience of all things. But this acceptance of time's dominion over us doesn't mean passivity or despair. Paradoxically, it can be a source of freedom. If we accept that everything is temporary, we can stop expending so much energy trying to create permanence. We can engage more fully with the present moment, knowing that it's all we truly have. Moreover, the awareness of time's relentless march can actually intensify our experience of life. In The Trouble with Being Born, Cioran writes, "It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late." This provocative statement suggests that our awareness of death, the ultimate expression of time's power over us, can make life more vivid and immediate. Think about it. If we were immortal, would anything really matter? Would we feel the urgency to create, to love, to experience? It's our awareness of our finite time that gives life its poignancy and intensity. Each moment becomes precious precisely because it's fleeting. Of course, living with this acute awareness of time is no easy task. It requires a kind of courage, the courage to face our own temporality without flinching. In a world that often tries to distract us from thoughts of death and impermanence, Cioran's philosophy calls us to a radical honesty about our condition. As we sit with Cioran's ideas about time, it's natural to feel a range of emotions. There might be fear. After all, who wants to constantly confront their own mortality? There might be a sense of futility. If everything is temporary, why bother? But there might also be a strange sort of peace. If we accept time's dominion over us, we can stop fighting against it and start living more fully in the present. But Cioran's views on time are intimately connected to another key aspect of his philosophy: his thoughts on consciousness itself. Because it's our consciousness, our awareness of time, and our own existence within it that sets us apart from other beings and creates the conditions for our unique form of suffering. Let's explore this next: the tyranny of consciousness. As we delve deeper into Emil Cioran's philosophical world, we encounter one of his most provocative ideas: the tyranny of consciousness. For Cioran, consciousness, that defining feature of human existence, our ability to be aware of ourselves and our place in the world, is not a gift but a burden. It's the source of our unique form of suffering, setting us apart from other animals and trapping us in a prison of awareness. In The Trouble with Being Born, Cioran writes, "The fact that life has no meaning is a reason to live, moreover, the only one." This paradoxical statement encapsulates his view on consciousness. Our awareness of life's meaninglessness, a product of our consciousness, becomes both our curse and our defining characteristic. But what exactly does Cioran mean when he talks about the tyranny of consciousness? And why does he take such a negative view of what many consider to be humanity's greatest asset? To understand Cioran's perspective, we need to consider consciousness in the context of his broader philosophy. As we've discussed, Cioran sees existence as fundamentally absurd, suffering as inevitable, and time as a relentless oppressor. Consciousness, in this view, is what makes us acutely aware of these harsh realities. Think about it. Unlike other animals who simply exist in the present moment, we humans are burdened with an awareness of our own mortality, of the vastness of time and space, of our own insignificance in the grand scheme of things. We can anticipate future pain, regret past actions, and ponder the meaninglessness of our existence. This awareness, according to Cioran, is a constant source of anguish. In On the Heights of Despair, Cioran writes, "I feel completely detached from everything, unable to desire anything. My only emotions are negative ones. All my days are marked by a horrible nothingness." This quote gives us a glimpse into the depths of suffering that consciousness can produce. For Cioran, even the absence of suffering, a state of detachment or neutrality, becomes its own form of torment when filtered through the lens of consciousness. But Cioran goes even further. He suggests that consciousness not only makes us aware of life's hardships, but actually amplifies them. Our ability to reflect on our experiences, to analyze and overthink, often intensifies our suffering. A momentary pain becomes a source of ongoing distress as we anticipate its return or dwell on its memory. A fleeting disappointment can turn into a prolonged state of dejection as we ruminate on its implications. Moreover, Cioran argues that consciousness creates a fundamental alienation from the world and from ourselves. In The Fall into Time, he writes, "We do not rush toward death. We flee the catastrophe of birth, survivors struggling to forget it." This striking statement suggests that consciousness makes us aware of our separation from the world, a separation that begins at birth and that we spend our lives trying to overcome. Think about it. As conscious beings, we're always slightly removed from our experiences. We don't just live our lives, we observe ourselves living them. This creates a kind of existential distance, a gap between our conscious selves and the immediacy of experience. For Cioran, this gap is a source of ongoing anguish. But perhaps the most tyrannical aspect of consciousness, in Cioran's view, is its relentlessness. We can't simply turn off our awareness. Even in sleep, our minds continue to churn, producing dreams that often reflect our anxieties and preoccupations. Consciousness is a constant companion, always there, always watching, always analyzing. In The Trouble with Being Born, Cioran writes, "It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late." This provocative statement reflects the idea that we can't escape consciousness even through death. By the time we die, we've already endured a lifetime of conscious suffering. So what's the solution? Cioran doesn't offer easy answers or comforting platitudes. He doesn't suggest that we try to overcome or transcend consciousness. Instead, he advocates for a kind of clear-sighted acknowledgement of our condition. We accept the tyranny of consciousness not because it leads to happiness, but because it's the most authentic way of engaging with our existence. In A Short History of Decay, Cioran writes, "We are all deep in a hell, each moment of which is a miracle." This statement beautifully captures the dual nature of consciousness in Cioran's philosophy. On one hand, consciousness traps us in a kind of hell, a state of constant awareness of life's absurdities and sufferings. On the other hand, it allows us to perceive each moment as a miracle, a brief flicker of awareness in the vast darkness of unconsciousness. This perspective on consciousness might seem unbearably bleak. And indeed, Cioran's writing can be challenging to engage with, but there's also a strange kind of liberation in his unflinching honesty. In a world that often tries to sell us on the power of positive thinking or the virtues of mindfulness, Cioran's acknowledgement of the darker aspects of consciousness can feel like a breath of fresh air. Moreover, Cioran's perspective on consciousness can actually be quite free. If we accept that consciousness is inherently tyrannical, we can stop blaming ourselves for our negative thoughts and feelings. We can let go of the idea that we should always be happy or at peace. We can engage more authentically with the full range of human experience, including its darker aspects. As we sit with Cioran's ideas about consciousness, it's natural to feel a range of emotions. There might be resistance. After all, who wants to think of their defining characteristic as a source of suffering? There might be a sense of despair or hopelessness, but there might also be a strange sort of comfort. After all, if consciousness is truly tyrannical, then perhaps we can stop trying so hard to control our thoughts and feelings and start living more fully in the present moment. But this acceptance of the tyranny of consciousness leads us to another key aspect of Cioran's philosophy: his unique style and the impact of his work. Because if consciousness is truly inescapable, how do we express this condition? How do we communicate the depths of existential anguish? Let's explore this next. Cioran's style and impact. As we've journeyed through the dark landscape of Emil Cioran's philosophy, we've encountered ideas that are challenging, provocative, and often deeply unsettling. But to fully appreciate Cioran's impact on philosophical thought, we need to consider not just what he said, but how he said it. Cioran's unique style is as much a part of his philosophy as the ideas themselves. In On the Heights of Despair, Cioran writes, "I've invented nothing. I've simply been the secretary of my sensations." This humble statement belies the power and originality of Cioran's writing. Far from being a mere transcriber of experience, Cioran was a master stylist, crafting prose that was at once poetic, aphoristic, and brutally honest. But what exactly characterizes Cioran's style? And how does it contribute to the impact of his philosophical ideas? First and foremost, Cioran was a master of the aphorism, short, pithy statements that encapsulate complex ideas in memorable form. His books are filled with these gem-like sentences that stick in the mind long after reading. For example, from The Trouble with Being Born, "It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late." Or from A Short History of Decay, "We are all deep in a hell, each moment of which is a miracle." These aphorisms are not just clever turns of phrase. They're distillations of Cioran's philosophy, capturing in a few words the paradoxes and contradictions of human existence. They're designed to shock us out of our complacency, to make us see the world anew. But Cioran's style goes beyond aphorisms. His writing is characterized by a raw, unflinching honesty. He doesn't shy away from the darkest aspects of human experience. Instead, he dives headlong into them, exploring the depths of despair, anxiety, and existential anguish with an almost perverse relish. In On the Heights of Despair, he writes, "I feel completely detached from everything, unable to desire anything. My only emotions are negative ones. All my days are marked by a horrible nothingness." This kind of stark, uncompromising prose is typical of Cioran. He strips away all pretense, all attempts at comfort or consolation, leaving us face to face with the harsh realities of existence. Yet, paradoxically, there's a strange beauty in Cioran's writing. Even as he describes the most depressing aspects of life, his prose often achieves a kind of poetic intensity. He has a gift for vivid imagery and unexpected metaphors that make his ideas come alive in the reader's mind. For example, in The Fall into Time, he writes, "We do not rush toward death. We flee the catastrophe of birth, survivors struggling to forget it." This striking image, life as a flight from birth rather than a journey toward death, is typical of Cioran's ability to reframe familiar ideas in startling new ways. Another key aspect of Cioran's style is his use of humor, albeit a very dark, sardonic kind of humor. Even in his most pessimistic passages, there's often an undercurrent of irony or absurd comedy. This humor serves multiple purposes. It makes his often grim ideas more palatable, It highlights the absurdities of existence that he's pointing out, and it creates a kind of complicity between writer and reader. We're all in on the cosmic joke together. For instance, in The Trouble with Being Born, he writes, "Life is merely a fracas on an unmapped terrain, and the universe a geometry stricken with epilepsy." This description of existence is undeniably bleak, but there's also a kind of absurd humor in the over-the-top imagery. But perhaps the most striking aspect of Cioran's style is its intensity. Reading Cioran is not a passive experience. His writing demands engagement, provoking strong reactions, whether agreement, disagreement, or a complex mix of both. He doesn't argue in the traditional philosophical sense, laying out premises and drawing logical conclusions. Instead, he assaults the reader with a barrage of provocative statements and vivid images, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about existence. This intensity is not accidental. For Cioran, philosophy wasn't an abstract intellectual exercise, but a visceral engagement with the experience of being alive. His goal wasn't to construct logical arguments, but to capture the feeling of existence in all its absurdity and anguish. In A Short History of Decay, he writes, "We are all deep in a hell, each moment of which is a miracle." This statement encapsulates Cioran's ability to hold contradictory ideas in tension. Life is hell, yes, but it's also miraculous. This paradoxical view of existence is at the heart of Cioran's philosophy, and his unique style is perfectly suited to expressing it. Of course, Cioran's style and ideas have not been without controversy. His unrelenting pessimism and his provocative statements have often been criticized as nihilistic or even dangerous. Some have accused him of glorifying despair or of encouraging a kind of passive resignation in the face of life's difficulties. But such criticisms often miss the point of Cioran's work. His goal wasn't to push people towards despair, but to encourage a kind of clear-sighted honesty about the human condition. By stripping away comforting illusions and forcing us to confront the harsh realities of existence, Cioran believed we could live more authentically. Moreover, despite the bleakness of his philosophy, there's a strange kind of affirmation in Cioran's work. By facing the worst aspects of existence head-on, without flinching, he demonstrates a kind of courage and integrity. His refusal to seek easy consolations or to turn away from life's darkest aspects can be seen as a form of existential heroism. In The Trouble with Being Born, Cioran writes, "The fact that life has no meaning is a reason to live, moreover, the only one." This paradoxical statement encapsulates the complex impact of Cioran's work. While he denies any inherent meaning to existence, he also suggests that this very meaninglessness can be a source of liberation and even a reason to embrace life. Cioran's impact on philosophical thought has been profound, if sometimes underappreciated. He stands as a unique figure in 20th century philosophy, bridging the gap between existentialism and postmodernism. His unflinching examination of human suffering and the absurdity of existence has influenced thinkers in various fields, from philosophy and literature to psychology and cultural studies. But perhaps Cioran's greatest impact has been on individual readers. For many, encountering Cioran's work is a transformative experience. His brutal honesty can be shocking, even painful, but it can also be strangely liberating. By articulating the darkest aspects of human experience, Cioran gives voice to thoughts and feelings that many people have but are afraid to express. In On the Heights of Despair, Cioran writes, "I've invented nothing. I've simply been the secretary of my sensations." This humble statement belies the power of his work. By faithfully recording his own experiences and thoughts, no matter how dark or disturbing, Cioran created a body of work that resonates deeply with many readers. He shows us that we're not alone in our doubts, our fears, our moments of despair. Moreover, Cioran's style, his use of aphorisms, his dark humor, his poetic intensity, has had a significant impact on literary style. He demonstrated that philosophy could be passionate, personal, and poetic, breaking down the barriers between philosophy and literature. As we conclude our exploration of Cioran's philosophy and style, it's worth reflecting on the enduring relevance of his ideas. In a world that often seems absurd, where suffering is omnipresent and the search for meaning can feel futile, Cioran's unflinching examination of the human condition remains as pertinent as ever. His work challenges us to confront the hardest truths about existence, not to wallow in despair, but to live more authentically. By acknowledging the darkness, we may paradoxically find a kind of freedom, the freedom that comes from no longer needing to pretend, to hope for impossible things, or to find meaning where there may be none. In A Short History of Decay, Cioran writes, "We are all deep in a hell, each moment of which is a miracle." This statement, with its juxtaposition of hell and miracle, captures the essence of Cioran's philosophy. Life is suffering, yes, but it's also an incredible, unlikely phenomenon. By fully acknowledging both the pain and the wonder of existence, we can perhaps live more fully, more honestly, more intensely. As we sit with Cioran's ideas, it's natural to feel a mix of emotions. There might be resistance, after all. His vision of existence is not an easy one to accept. There might be a sense of recognition, a feeling that he's articulating thoughts we've had but been afraid to express. There might be a kind of exhilaration, the thrill of encountering ideas that challenge us to see the world in a new way. Whatever our reaction, engaging with Cioran's philosophy is a profound and often transformative experience. His work stands as a testament to the power of unflinching honesty and the enduring relevance of philosophical inquiry. In a world that often seeks easy answers and comforting illusions, Cioran reminds us of the value of facing reality in all its harsh complexity. As we come to the end of our journey through Emil Cioran's dark philosophical landscape, you might find yourself wanting to delve deeper into his work. Whether you're intrigued, disturbed, or a combination of both, Cioran's writings offer a wealth of provocative ideas to explore further. If you're interested in diving deeper into Cioran's philosophy, here are some key works you might want to consider. 1. On the Heights of Despair, 1934. This was Cioran's first book, written in Romanian when he was only 22. Despite his youth, it already contains many of the themes that would preoccupy him throughout his career. It's a passionate, almost feverish exploration of suffering, despair, and the absurdity of existence. The book is notable for its intensity and its unflinching examination of the darkest aspects of human experience. 2. A Short History of Decay, 1949. This was Cioran's first book written in French, and it marked a shift in his style towards the more aphoristic, ironic approach that would characterize his later work. In this book, Cioran examines the decay inherent in all things civilizations, ideas, individuals. It's a masterpiece of philosophical pessimism, filled with memorable aphorisms and startling insights. 3. The Trouble with Being Born, 1973. This is perhaps Cioran's most famous work, and it's a good entry point for those new to his philosophy. The book is a collection of aphorisms and short essays exploring themes of death, time, God, and the futility of existence. Despite its bleak subject matter, it's often darkly funny, showcasing Cioran's sardonic wit. 4. Drawn and Quartered, 1979. This later work shows Cioran at his most aphoristic and ironic. It's a collection of short pieces that range from just a few lines to a few pages, covering a wide range of topics but always returning to Cioran's core themes of suffering, time, and the absurdity of existence. 5. Anathemas and Admirations, 1987. One of Cioran's last books. This work contains essays on writers and thinkers who influenced him, as well as more general philosophical reflections. It offers insight into Cioran's intellectual influences and his place in the broader context of philosophical and literary history. As you explore these works, it's worth keeping a few things in mind. First, Cioran's writing can be intense and emotionally challenging. His unflinching examination of suffering and despair can be overwhelming if approached all at once. It's often best to read Cioran in small doses, giving yourself time to digest and reflect on his ideas. Second, don't be afraid to disagree with Cioran. His goal wasn't to convince readers of a particular philosophical system, but to provoke thought and challenge conventional ways of thinking. Engaging critically with his ideas, questioning them, and considering how they relate to your own experiences can be a valuable philosophical exercise. Third, pay attention to Cioran's style as well as his ideas. His use of aphorisms, his dark humor, his vivid imagery, All of these contribute to the impact of his work. Cioran wasn't just a philosopher, but a literary stylist of the highest order. Finally, consider exploring some secondary literature on Cioran. While his work stands on its own, understanding the context in which he was writing and how his ideas have been interpreted by others can enrich your appreciation of his philosophy. Some scholars have drawn interesting connections between Cioran's work and various philosophical traditions, from existentialism to Buddhism. As you delve deeper into Cioran's world, you may find yourself changed by the experience. His relentless questioning of everything we take for granted can be unsettling, but it can also be liberating. By stripping away comforting illusions and forcing us to confront the harsh realities of existence, Cioran challenges us to live more authentically and to engage more deeply with the fundamental questions of human existence. In The Trouble with Being Born, Cioran writes, "The fact that life has no meaning is a reason to live, moreover, the only one." This paradoxical statement encapsulates the strange, dark wisdom at the heart of Cioran's philosophy. By facing the meaninglessness of existence head-on, we may paradoxically find a kind of freedom, the freedom to create our own meaning, to live without illusions, to embrace the full complexity of human experience. Whether you ultimately agree or disagree with Cioran's bleak vision of existence, engaging with his work is a profound and often transformative experience. His unflinching honesty, his stylistic brilliance, and his willingness to confront the darkest aspects of human experience make him a unique and enduringly relevant voice in modern philosophy. As we come to the end of our exploration of Emil Cioran's philosophy, we find ourselves standing on the edge of an abyss. Cioran's work has taken us on a journey through the darkest recesses of human experience, forcing us to confront uncomfortable truths about existence, suffering, and the human condition. We've grappled with Cioran's view of the absurdity of existence, the idea that life is fundamentally meaningless, and that our attempts to create meaning are ultimately futile. We've explored his thoughts on the inevitability of suffering, not as an unfortunate aspect of life, but as an integral part of existence itself. We've considered Cioran's provocative stance on hope, seeing it not as a virtue, but as a form of delusion that amplifies our suffering. We've examined his view of time as a relentless oppressor, constantly reminding us of our mortality and the transient nature of all things. We've delved into Cioran's thoughts on consciousness, seeing it not as a gift, but as a burden, the source of our unique form of suffering that sets us apart from other beings. And we've explored Cioran's unique style and the impact of his work, seeing how his unflinching honesty and stylistic brilliance have influenced philosophical thought and resonated with readers around the world. As we sit with these ideas, it's natural to feel a range of emotions. Cioran's philosophy is not easy to digest. It challenges our deepest beliefs about life, meaning, and human nature. It forces us to confront aspects of existence that we often prefer to ignore or deny. But there's also a strange kind of liberation in Cioran's thought. By stripping away comforting illusions and facing the harsh realities of existence head-on, he offers us a path to a more authentic way of living. In a world that often encourages us to seek easy answers and comforting platitudes, Cioran's unflinching honesty can feel like a breath of fresh air. In The Trouble with Being Born, Cioran writes, "The fact that life has no meaning is a reason to live, moreover, the only one." This paradoxical statement encapsulates the complex wisdom at the heart of Cioran's philosophy. By acknowledging the meaninglessness of existence, we free ourselves from the burden of having to find or create meaning. We can simply be, embracing the full complexity of human experience without illusions or false hopes. Of course, living with this level of awareness is no easy task. Cioran doesn't offer us comfort or easy solutions. Instead, he challenges us to find the courage to face reality as it is, to live authentically in the face of absurdity and suffering. As we conclude our journey through Cioran's philosophical landscape, it's worth reflecting on why his work continues to resonate with readers today. In a world that often seems absurd, where suffering is omnipresent and the search for meaning can feel futile, Cioran's unflinching examination of the human condition remains as pertinent as ever. His work reminds us of the value of intellectual honesty, of the courage it takes to confront the hardest truths about existence. It challenges us to think deeply about what it means to be human, to be conscious, to exist in a universe that seems indifferent to our presence. Moreover, despite the bleakness of his vision, there's a strange kind of affirmation in Cioran's work. By facing the worst aspects of existence without flinching, he demonstrates a kind of existential heroism. His refusal to turn away from life's darkest aspects can be seen as a form of engagement with life in all its complexity. In A Short History of Decay, Cioran writes, "We are all deep in a hell, each moment of which is a miracle." This statement, with its juxtaposition of hell and miracle, captures the essence of Cioran's philosophy. Life is suffering, yes, but it's also an incredible, unlikely phenomenon. By fully acknowledging both the pain and the wonder of existence, we can perhaps live more fully, more honestly, more intensely. As we close this exploration of Cioran's philosophy, I encourage you to sit with these ideas, to let them challenge you, provoke you, perhaps even change you. Whether you ultimately agree or disagree with Cioran's bleak vision of existence, engaging with his work can be a profound and transformative experience. In a world that often seeks easy answers and comforting illusions, Cioran reminds us of the value of facing reality in all its harsh complexity. He challenges us to live authentically, to engage deeply with the fundamental questions of human existence, and to find our own way of being in a universe that may be indifferent to our presence, but is nonetheless filled with wonder and possibility. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the dark and profound philosophy of Emil Cioran. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, in the words of Cioran himself, "It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late."